The cold did not arrive gently in Ashford Valley. It conquered. It pressed against doors, slipped through coat seams, and stiffened fingers until even breath felt fragile. The wind that morning did not howl. It whispered, slow and certain, as if it already knew what the town would do before Clara Whitlock did. She stood in the center of Main Street with a canvas sack clutched in her hands. Behind her, the heavy doors of Rowan and Hale Mercantile shut with a dull, echoing thud. Her father-in-law, Edmund Hale, had not shouted. He had not insulted her. He had simply removed her. "The land passes through blood," he had said in a voice as calm as ledger ink. "My son is gone. You are not blood." No anger, no sympathy, just finality. Clara felt something colder than winter settle into her ribs. Inside the sack were 2 dresses, a sewing kit, a wool shawl, and a cast-iron pan. Everything she owned now fit beneath her arm. No house, no husband, no claim. Windows along the street dimmed as she began walking. Curtains shifted. Eyes avoided hers. Yesterday she had been Mrs. Hale. Today she was simply excess. Grief she could have survived. Erasure cut deeper. She walked without direction until she reached the sheriff's post. A notice flapped against the wood, curling at the edges from rain and frost. Tax sale, North Briar Creek. Structure, inhabitable. Price, $5. $5. An insult disguised as opportunity. Clara felt the 5 coins sewn in the lining of her petticoat. She had hidden them months ago, earned quietly by selling her wedding quilt when her husband's illness deepened. Hope stitched in silver. Sheriff Gideon Mercer stepped out onto the porch, his coat collar raised against the wind. "You don't want that place," he said gently. "Roof's half gone, chimney collapsed, winter's turning mean." Clara met his gaze. "I have $5 and nowhere else to stand." The sheriff studied her, thin, grieving, but unbroken. After a moment, he sighed and took the coins. "Don't say I didn't warn you." He signed the deed. And just like that, Clara Whitlock bought ruin. The cabin stood 3 miles north near frozen Briar Creek. It was less a home and more a memory of one. The roof sagged inward like a tired back. Gaps yawned between logs. Snow drifted across the dirt floor as though winter had already claimed it. Clara stepped inside anyway. The air within felt even colder. For a long moment, she stood in silence. This was it, her inheritance, her exile. She did not cry. Instead, she cleared a corner where one beam still held and swept aside the snow with her boot. She wrapped herself in her shawl and leaned against the log wall. The wind slipped through cracks and whispered through the structure. Sleep came in shivers. Before dawn, doubt crept in. Edmund had not been cruel. He had been practical. Perhaps she had mistaken stubbornness for strength. But when gray light crept across the floor, Clara arose. If the cabin was bones, she would give it muscle. If it was broken, she would learn how to mend. And if winter wanted her gone, it would have to fight. On the second morning, she heard footsteps crunching over frost. An older woman stood in the doorway, wrapped in mismatched furs. Her eyes were sharp and bright. "Miriam Crow, you're the one who bought this wreck." "I bought land," Clara replied evenly. Miriam glanced around. "You bought yourself a grave." Then she extended a clay jug. Warm cider. The heat surprised Clara's throat, spreading down into her chest like a forgotten memory. "There's clay beneath the creek ice. Frozen crust on top, soft underneath. Dig deep. Pack your gaps before nightfall." From her coat pocket, she withdrew a rusted trowel. "Use this. Pride won't seal walls." Then she left. Clara stood staring at the tool. Kindness felt unfamiliar, but it was enough. She walked toward the creek and began to dig. The clay was stubborn, frozen hard at the surface. She broke through with numb fingers until she reached the heavy, wet earth beneath. She hauled bucket after bucket back to the cabin, mixed it with dried meadow grass, pressed it into the cracks between logs. The first day, her hands blistered. The second, they split open. By the third, they bled freely into the clay. The wind still slipped through, but less. Each sealed gap quieted the whistle. Each small improvement felt like a rebellion. By the fourth morning, the cabin no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a challenge. That was when Elias Thorne arrived, the blacksmith, broad-shouldered, quiet, carrying a leather roll of tools. "Heard there's a widow trying to live in a ghost shack," he said. "I'm neither ghost nor leaving," Clara replied evenly. He surveyed the structure and nodded once. Chimney first. Without waiting for permission, he cleared rubble and began rebuilding the hearth stone by stone. Clara worked beside him in silence, passing mortar, steadying stones. By dusk, the chimney stood whole. When they lit the first fire and smoke rose cleanly through the flue, something shifted inside her. "You've got backbone," he said. Clara watched the flame steady. Backbone cheaper than begging. He left her a hammer and a box of nails. Snow's coming. Fixing the roof nearly defeated her. Boards splintered beneath her boots. Wind shoved her sideways as she balanced on rafters. She stitched feed sacks together, layered them beneath loose planks, weighed them down with stone. She hammered until her arms trembled. The cabin groaned, but it did not fall. When she climbed down and lit her hearth that evening, the firelight flickered against walls she had sealed with her own blood. For the first time, she felt something beyond survival. Ownership. A knock came one evening as twilight settled purple across the ridge. A girl stood outside, maybe 12 years old. Lena Porter. "My mother sent stew," she said shyly, holding a pot wrapped in cloth. The smell nearly broke her. Warmth, carrots, beef, salt. Lena glanced around the cabin. "It's warm in here." Clara followed her gaze. Patched walls, stacked firewood, steady hearth. "It's home," she said softly. The word no longer felt like a lie. The sky changed a week later. Still, heavy, no stars. Clara sensed the storm before the first gust struck. She stacked firewood high, checked the clay seals, reinforced the roof seams. The blizzard arrived at midnight. It screamed. The cabin shook violently. Wind battered the walls like fists. Clara fed the hearth log by log. The clay held. The nails held. So did she. On the second day, a massive oak branch crashed through the roof. Wood splintered. Snow spilled inside. For one terrifying second, she froze. Then she moved. Climbing onto a stool, she nailed a board across the breach, teeth rattling with each strike. "Not today," she whispered. The wind howled in answer, but it did not take her. By the third morning, silence. The door would not open. Snow had buried it halfway. Clara dug herself out using her cast iron pan. The valley below lay shattered. Roofs crushed, trees flattened, smoke absent. And then she saw them, a line of figures climbing toward her ridge. Sheriff Mercer, Elias Thorne, Edmund Hale. Their faces were pale. "The town hall's gone," the sheriff called. "Children are freezing." Clara looked at Edmund, the man who erased her. Then she stepped aside. "Bring them in." Her small cabin filled with breath and fear. Children huddled near the hearth. The elderly leaned against sealed walls. Clara rationed grain into thin porridge, melted snow for water. Elias guarded the door against drifting snow. Edmund sat in silence, staring at the walls she had repaired with bleeding hands. "It didn't think this place had a floor left," he muttered. Clara stirred the pot. "The floor was always there," she replied calmly. It just needed clearing. For 3 days, the $5 ruin sheltered Ashford Valley. When the storm passed, the townspeople left differently than they had arrived, not with pity, but with respect. Miriam brought dried venison, Lena's father delivered seasoned oak, even Edmund returned days later with polished brass hinges. "I misjudged you," he admitted quietly. Clara accepted the hinges. She no longer needed his apology. Weeks later, a rider arrived in a city coat. Alistair Green from the Territorial Development Office. "We're rebuilding," he said. "We need buildings that survive." The sheriff had recommended her, a paid advisory role. Clara agreed, on one condition: "I work from here." Briar Ridge became the blueprint for reconstruction. She bought proper tools, oxen, stronger timber. She taught young men how to read grain patterns and mix frost-proof mortar. She taught them weight distribution and patience. She taught them to listen to a structure's language. The valley rebuilt stronger than before, and at its center stood the cabin no one wanted. By spring, wildflowers kissed the melting snow around Briar Ridge. Clara stood on her porch, watching the valley breathe again. The woman who had walked through town with 5 coins felt like a shadow from another life. She had built more than walls. She had built identity. People no longer called her widow. They called her the keeper of Briar Ridge. The wind moved across the clearing. It still carried cold, but it no longer entered her walls. Clara rested her scarred hands on the porch railing and looked toward Ashford Valley. If everything were taken from her again, she now knew how to rebuild. The storm had not saved her. She had saved herself. One board, one nail, one stubborn breath at a time. And this time, when the wind whispered through the trees, it sounded like respect. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, teach, and entertain. Until next time, bye!